All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our Cold War presentation here. This is assuming that you can recall a lot of the information that we learned in our World War II unit. If I go a little fast, don't feel afraid to pause your teacher here, pause your lecture, and copy down some notes. We're going to have to move a little quickly though, because, well, we got a lot to cover. So was the Cold War an actual war? Webster's dictionary defines the Cold War as a conflict or dispute between two groups that does not involve actual fighting. Now, this is actually an interesting definition. It's actually quite literal, and there can be some debate about were there shots actually fired. You may actually see this question on your test. We'll see. How about that? So you have two antagonistic groups here. You have the United States on the left. You have the Soviet Union here on the right, and they're going to be working against each other for power, for economic gain. We're going to be working against each other throughout the course of the Cold War. Now let's talk about some early Russian-American relations here. In 1859, lest you forget, the United States comes from Russia. It was a former Russian territory. In 1859, they actually approached the United States about purchasing this territory. But let's not forget also that in 1860 to 1865, the United States was fighting a very important conflict that we call the Civil War. Now, after the war is over and things had settled down somewhat, the Reconstruction was happening. In 1867, the United States buys Alaska for $7 million in an effort led by Secretary of State Seward under the Andrew Johnson administration. If you're Russians, you may feel a little slighted, however, by this $7 million price, because not too long after, gold is going to be discovered in Alaska. And now, I mean, hey, we have a lot of oil reserves up in Alaska. So if you are, Russian, you may feel a little slighted by that gain there. When the purchase was made, the United States sent a federal envoy up there to, expel the Russians out of that territory. And no shots were fired, no deaths were had, but there was, some animosity there. And there, the American force was a little forceful, and no pun intended, in expelling the Russians. And then we come to the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905. Some historians refer to this as World War Zero. Russia moved troops to China in 1902, and it threatened the United States open door economic policy with that nation. In case you didn't realize, a lot of the world's history is motivated by economics, and we'll get more into that later. But our president at the time, Teddy Roosevelt, sided with Japan in the war, and he promised American support to the Japanese should any European powers ally with Russia. As you can see, this has the capability, this has the ability to really get out of hand and cause a massive war. But thankfully, Teddy Roosevelt organized a peace conference between the two nations in New Hampshire, and peace was made to be had. But let's not forget that in these two instances, especially, the United States is actually on the other side, apart from Russia, and there may be some brewing feelings there. In 1917, the United States opposed Russia's communist revolution that happened. We joined numerous other nations in sending combat troops to support the pro-Tsarist whites against Lenin's reds. Let me pull up my laser pointer here. Here you have Vladimir Lenin, the leader of that revolution. Russia at this point becomes a communist state. It is no longer monarchical. It is no longer under the rule of the Tsar. Now it is a communist state where economics has changed. The political atmosphere has changed. Let's take a look at some art from this era. Here you have Vladimir Lenin leading the people to prosperity, leading them, he looks almost like Hercules or someone very important. He got the flag draped around him, and I want you to notice, look at his hand here. He's holding a common man, a common worker's hat. He made a very intentional display of trying to look like a common person here. Take a look over here at this picture. Here we have the Bolshevik, the leader, the movement is moving through the city with great speed, and all the people are supporting him. And he's got this red flag, the symbol of communism, and it's permeated through the entire city. And there's great uh, relief coming from the oppression of the czar. We're going to be communists, and everything's going to be okay now. Well, the United States took great offense to that because communism, where the state is in control of the economy and control of all politics, and you do pretty much what the state tells you to do, especially in the Russian system that is going to be growing out of this revolution. You do what's told of you, and that in America we don't do that. We like to make something of ourselves. We like to have choice. We like to do this and that and the other, and have our cake and eat it too. And there's nothing wrong with that. I am proud to be an American. But the thing is the United States is going to look across the ocean and look at what's going on in Moscow, and they're going to be very troubled. It's going to be very anti-American to be a communist. So let's look at communism. We're going to use cows. Yes, we will use bovines to discuss our economic system, our economic differences. So let's imagine that you are this farmer here. You're making an honest living. You have 2 cows, and here's the government. There's the Kremlin, and here's what happens if you are a farmer with 2 cows. The state will take your cows, but don't worry, they will give you milk. Actually, that's quite simple, but it is effective for our purposes. The capitalist system is a little more involved. The farmer here has a choice. He can sell his milk on the market, and maybe even sell a cow on the market. With that money, he could get a bull and get some more cows. Why not? This is America. It's a free country. So what is his reward for doing this? Well, the market's going to reward him with price, with value, with currency, with capitalism. Uh, how does the government involve? Well, they tax the market and they tax the farmer. So there's a little more choice here. There's a little more fluidity. It's a little more democratic in nature. So going back, World War II, we're going to skim through pretty quickly on this. Stalin is the leader of the Russians beginning in 1929. He's a Soviet premier, and he's very brutal. He's very oppressive to his own people. And I think it's very interesting that he didn't ally against Hitler's Nazi regime until Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. What actually happens here is Germany goes back on the non-aggression pact that they had made, and Russia then joins the Allied forces in their fight against Hitler. But what begins to happen is the Soviet Union takes the brunt of the German Wehrmacht, the armed defenses that were used during World War II. 3/4 of the German forces were hurled at the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. President Roosevelt promised a Western Front that didn't really materialize until the invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna skim through because we're focusing on the Cold War, not World War II. But here we have, the Yalta Conference, February 1945, and we have Winston Churchill, we have Franklin Roosevelt, we have Joseph Stalin, and I have here a mushroom cloud, to represent knowledge of the atomic bomb. Franklin Roosevelt commissioned the Manhattan Project, and he gave Churchill some insight on it, but not Stalin. There's obvious distrust here. And so what begins is an arms race. We're jumping ahead of ourselves just a little bit. Harry Truman told Stalin in passing at the Potsdam Conference, he says, "We had a new weapon of unusual destructive force." This was July 24th, 1945. And his reaction was, "Good, I hope that you use it against the Japanese and you have a decisive victory." Uh, as you can see, we did just that. This is an actual picture of Hiroshima, an actual picture from Nagasaki and the aftermath of that bomb. But what begins to happen is the mutually assured destruction. It's where it's a military theory of nuclear deterrence, holding that neither side will attack the other. Both sides are guaranteed to be totally destroyed in the conflict. Of this political cartoon here, we're using mild weapons compared to what we actually have because, well, that would destroy the world. I have this graphic up here. It's very interesting because I think it kind of gives you a sense that these missiles literally could end up anywhere. And then this is just kind of a fun, I light, you light, we're all done here, all night, night. Nash equilibrium. This is very interesting. You have this American right here, John Nash. If you look up at the top, if you've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, you may recognize some of his theory. Let's just say we're the Russians, and we'll use red. Let's say you downplay your forces, you build down your military, and here you build up your military. And let's just say that we are the Americans, and probably are. And in this case, we build down our military. And in this case, we build up our military. Which is more likely to happen? The United States is not going to build up and Russia going to stand down. That's just not going to happen. It's not reasonable. Uh, and we're not going to build down if Russia builds up. That's just silly. So what we have, here are the equilibriums. Either we both build up, which actually happens, or we both stand down, which happens later. The idea here is that Nash decided that people will do what's best for themselves and the welfare of the group. Obviously, we never devolved into nuclear war, but we very well could have. This is something to think about when we think about the arms race and mutually assured destruction. Is I don't feel that either side really wanted to be responsible for the death of all mankind. Um, we're we're gonna get into some pretty scary episodes in the Cold War, and I want you to keep this graphic in mind. That you might even want to write that down. It's logical for there to be an arms race, and it's logical for us to both put down our arms. All right, well, we will pick up right here, and that concludes our first section of the Cold War.